Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. And on today's show, we start our look into the James Bond series, long-standing movie franchise. We do an overview of the entire thing before we talk about the first three movies in the series: Doctor No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger, a trifecta where Bond essentially becomes Bond. We'll talk about it all right here on Movie Marathon Mood, so stick around.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Hi, everyone. Jesse Ghosttrap here, joined by my friend, comrade, brother, Drew Cordell. Drew, how's it going, man?
I'm going great, Jesse. How are you doing, man?
Doing good, doing good. So, we're going to talk about all of the James Bond movies here, not all at one time, because I don't think we could stomach that type of marathon. That would be a little bit probably
Yeah.
too far, probably. But we're going to talk about initially the first three movies: Doctor No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger. And I'm trying really hard not to say Goldeneye, even though I definitely know the difference. It sometimes happens where
Goldeneye.
I alternate Goldeneye and Goldfinger. But regardless of which, I thought we'd start by talking about our relationship to the James Bond series in total. And I'll start just by saying that I honestly have no idea what my first James Bond movie was that I ever saw. Because, I mean, we were both born in the 80s, and James Bond had already been through several iterations before we were ever born. And I don't know if I first saw Sean Connery, Roger Moore, or who I saw first, but I've always loved James Bond. Grew up, really watching all the different movies. I can say the first one I saw in theaters was Goldeneye. I did see Goldeneye in theaters first, which means I guess that our Bond is Pierce Brosnan, technically, because he was James
Yeah.
Bond through our formative years. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, I was 11 years old when Goldeneye came out in theaters, and have seen most of the Bond movies in theaters since then. But I, I guess I've just always loved all the different aspects of Bond. Some people might be partial to one particular era, and I personally just really like all the different types of ways Bond can be, and that might have to do with the fact that I grew up watching people as disparate as Sean Connery and Roger Moore. How about you, Drew? Do you remember being introduced to Bond?
I'm like you. I don't remember the first movie I watched. Um, I remember that TBS would do marathons, and my dad sat me down and was like, "Okay, this is James Bond," and I just remember that there were a lot of them that came on. It may have been around Christmas or something. Uh, in particular, my memories thinking it was like around the holidays they were doing a marathon of James Bond, and I sat down with Dad and we watched probably a lot of Roger Moore because, as you were saying, a lot of people have like their Bond or the claim, the Bond of their era. Well, that was definitely my parents' Bond was. Roger Moore, and I remember the Man with the Golden Gun as being one of the first ones I saw for sure because just something about the belly dancer scene. I don't know why, but it sticks out in my memory so well as like being something that just had an immediate impression of me on me of Roger Moore like getting this bullet out of a woman's belly button. It's just hilarious. And it pretty much sums up Roger Moore's career as Bond too, which is that he's just ridiculous, but I love him. But he's not just ridiculous. There's some great Roger Moore Bond films, but you know, and I remember seeing some Connery ones, Goldfinger particularly, and Doctor No. I saw both of those a lot when I was younger. because and we would record them as they came on TBS, and those two I watched a lot. I watched Diamonds Are Forever a lot for some reason. I really liked some of the Connery ones, and like you said, Brosnan was out at the time. I did not see Goldeneye in theaters, but I saw all the rest of them in theaters. I saw Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough and Unfortunately Die Another Day. Uh, but the big thing at the time, which I was already a Bond fan, but there was kind of an explosion in popularity with Bond in like '97 because Goldeneye came out for the Nintendo 64, and that was a
Oh
huge
yeah.
uh, video game at the time. It was a phenomenon at the time, one of the most popular video games of that era. It was like one of the first big multiplayer shooters, and it was heavy. Oh, of course, it was completely based off Goldeneye, but it had a lot of familiar faces from older movies in the multiplayer characters you could be. You could be Jaws, you could be Odd Job, you could be Mayday. Um, they even had a cheat code you could put in to unlock the other Bonds, like Connery and Dalton and more. I don't know if they even acknowledged Lazenby or not, but
I
that
don't
was.
remember, but probably
Yeah, probably not. I mean, you can't really. Can you really tell on Nintendo 64 graphics anyway? Uh, but and that kind of ties. I don't view GoldenEye the game as what got me into Bond, but it definitely kind of kept the interest I had because I was already a huge fan. But that led me to really kind of going out and watching the Brosnan ones as they came out and keeping up with the series and watching the old ones more and more. And of course, I guess Brosnan was the Bond of our youth, but I really think like the Bond of our generation is Daniel Craig because now he's been
yeah.
Bond since when he announced? Was he announced in 2005? So 15 years.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
He's had a good long run. It's at very least it's roughly in that time frame. So yeah.
yeah, so and I gotta say, he's probably been Bond. Has he been Bond the longest? I know it's not the most movies, but I know like that. We might have to look that up for a future episode.
Yeah, the number of years that he remained as James Bond. Yeah, that might be true. And they just took more time between movies.
Yeah, it's going to be close between him and Roger Moore, because I know Moore was for a good bit, but yeah, that we'll
12
look that up.
years.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. Well,
Roger
I
Moore
would
12 years and Casino Royale was 2006, so that's a good 14 years that Daniel Craig has been our Bond.
right.
Well, the longest, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's definitely the Bond of our generation, even though like you said, Brosnan was could kind of be viewed as the Bond of our formative years. But yeah, like Craig. Usually, when someone says James Bond, Daniel Craig is who I think of first, and if not him, probably Connery. But he's just kind of synonymous with Bond to me.
I really do believe that for the most part, Bond is the movies. Bond, that's what I gravitate toward and what I grew up loving. But I can't deny that the Nintendo 64 video game played a huge part in my interest in Bond because I played that game all the time. And it was a great game that obviously was
Right.
one of the most popular games probably of all time. Because I guarantee you, anybody from that era that played games will say, "Oh man, that Nintendo 64 game." They still remember playing GoldenEye, probably the most of any
Right.
of those games. It's just such an eventful type of thing, and uh, probably even more meaningful to some people than the movie. They probably think more of the movie just because of the game, which is an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, it really is, and we'll get to it once we get to the Brosnan years. I think Goldeneye is a great movie, but that game kind of just adds this whole other aspect to it that people think of, even myself. When I think of Goldeneye, I may not even necessarily think the movie first. I might think about the game and memories I had with it, um, because I had a lot of friendships that were formed over that game. Spent the night with some friends, and stayed up playing the the battle matches and all that, and it was fun, and but it was a great way to find other Bond fans too at the time, because back in the ancient days before there was streaming and you know constant text messaging and everything, if you wanted to talk about movies, you just walk up to somebody and be like, hey, have you ever heard of this, have you ever seen this? Like, movie conversations weren't, I mean, people talked about movies and stuff, but it wasn't quite the discussion that they are now, I think. And Goldeneye, the game, kind of got more people talking about James Bond, and really kind of me discovering that other people were also huge fans at the time. So yeah, that was a big boom for Bond in the 90s. Was that game probably helped Bond as much as any of the movies did that were released in that time.
I'm trying to imagine GoldenEye, the video game, in an era of Twitch. That would be really interesting. Or Smash Brothers, or several other games that I'm trying to think of from that era.
Right.
I'm sure somebody has played them. I'm sure people were playing those
Yeah.
games in emulators on Twitch. I'm gonna honestly, I'm never on
Yeah.
Twitch.
Right, right. But for those to be like the height of video games, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, not just playing them in general, but if those were the games of the time, it would just change the conversation.
Right.
So yeah, I you had the idea of just kind of off the top of our heads before we even watched them, some idea of our top 7 favorite Bond movies
Right.
to the best of our recollection, which may change obviously as we actually watch them, but it'll be interesting to see how our top 7 uh, holds up or doesn't hold up. I will say out of the gate, my least favorite is Die Another Day, and I cannot imagine that changing. But that's one thing that's pretty sure to stay the same, is hating Die Another Day. I'm not looking forward to watching it for this series.
No, but it'll be a fun episode.
We'll have fun ripping into it at the very least. That might mitigate some of the pain of having to watch it over again. I'll start by kind of trying to name. Well, From Russia with Love is one of my favorites, which we're gonna watch here shortly, obviously. But From Russia with Love is definitely one of mine. At one
Right.
time I would have called it my absolute favorite, and that might have been challenged by Skyfall.
Okay.
I'll after watching them again, I'm curious to see how that will or won't stay. And it's not like it matters a whole lot because I still think they're both terrific in their own right. But I'm curious after watching all the movies through how that will stand.
Right. Right.
Casino Royale is definitely right up there too. So Daniel Craig has at least 2 movies that I think are of the very best of Bond. Goldfinger, Spy Who Loved Me. Spy Who Loved Me is easily my favorite of the more era movies. Um, my favorite Pierce Brosnan has always been The World Is Not Enough.
Oh man.
Denise Richards as a nuclear physicist, notwithstanding. Um,
I've never had Christmas in Turkey.
And now I'm trying to think. That's five, I think, unless I'm miscounting. I was trying to count
Let's
as I
see. You
went.
said
Yeah, For Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Spy Who Loved Me, um, The World Is Not Enough. Oh yeah, so Casino Royale and Skyfall. So just one more. So I've named six. Huh. What would be my number seven? This becomes actually a little more difficult. I'm not 100% sure what I would say. I'm tempted to say The Living Daylights, honestly.
we'll say it then.
Let's just do it. I'm going to say The Living Daylights. We'll see if that stands or doesn't stand, but I'll say The Living Daylights.
Okay.
Let's throw some Timothy Dalton up in there.
Hey, you gotta give him some love.
How about you? Top seven.
All right.
We'll have plenty to say when we get to the Tim Dalton episodes.
Oh yeah. Um, well, going with the obvious choice, Goldfinger. I think we'll talk about it in depth really soon. But to me, Goldfinger is kind of like the quintessential Bond film. It establishes so many things for the franchise, and that's not the only reason it's good. It's got so many trappings that I love in a Bond film, as far as like the gadgets. The song is great, and it had some great characters, some great villains. I think Goldfinger is one of the best Bond villains. Like I said, we'll go in more depth. I almost wanted to put From Russia with Love in top seven. Maybe at the end of it, maybe it'll change. I'm not going to now, but it is a great one. It's probably eight or nine for me. It's up there. My second
It's
pick,
close, at least.
yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites. My second one's kind of a wild card. Diamonds Are Forever is a Bond movie I have
Okay.
seen I don't know how many times. It gets lambasted by a lot of people, but it's probably outside of Goldfinger, the Connery movie I've seen the most, and I just enjoyed like how fun it was at the time. When I was younger, I kind of had this vision of it being a little more serious than it was, and then I went back and watched it with you actually several years ago now, and discovered its more comedic elements, but it was still, still a fun movie to watch. So I have fond memories because of it. My third pick is Live and Let Die, which is my favorite of the Moore movies, and it's another one that I think is just a lot of fun, and it's a very different kind of Bond movie. It has black exploitation elements. It's very much an exploitation movie that just happens to have Bond in it, but it's a blast. Um, I'm gonna have to. I'll say the Man with the Golden Gun. That that was one of my initial introductions to Bond that I definitely remember. And Christopher Lee's Scaramanga is one of the best Bond villains for that alone. So Roger Moore surprisingly has two in my top seven.
That's perfectly fair.
Goldeneye. Uh, Goldeneye is my favorite of the Brosnans for number five. And we'll talk about it. We've already talked about it a lot, but it's definitely one of my favorite Bond movies. Casino Royale is my favorite Bond film,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna I'm gonna be a piece of crap and call a tie for number seven and say Skyfall and Spectre. Uh, just the two Sam Mendes Bonds were fantastic, and that's all I can say. I know it'll change. I'll have a clear, more brave opinion by the end of this, but those two are definitely
Well, that's the whole point, though. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Skyfall's great, and there are little things, little nitpick things about it that I didn't like. Whereas Spectre is also great and also has nitpick things about it that I didn't like. So neither one of them are perfect, but they're both fantastic Bond movies. And the Craig era, I think, has been the most consistent uh, so far. The three, top notch films and one movie that I wouldn't even say is bad, is just kind of, in the middle of the road with Quantum of Solace. But,
Well, I
three,
always called it Casino
you
Royale 1.5.
know, yeah, it's pretty much what it was.
It's just an addendum.
Yeah. So interesting. I'm glad you said World is Not Enough, because I really do like that movie, and I'm interested to get back to it. Um, and we'll talk about it later. But like, I feel like that's kind of an underrated Bond film. So I'm glad one of us mentioned it tonight.
Yeah, and like I said, it'll be a more clear picture once we get to the end of this road and we've actually watched them all through with fresh eyes,
Yeah.
and not too much time from now. But yeah, no, that's a good list. Even though you cheated, but
Right.
I will say that Daniel Craig is that his era is kind of similar to the Mission Impossible movies once J.J. Abrams got involved, in the sense that they all have their differences, but they have a lot of consistency
Right.
compared to what came before.
Right.
It's really kind of interesting how that works, especially Skyfall and Spectre. Like they work in concert with each other.
Yeah.
They
Exactly.
it's yeah, I mean it's Sam Mendes doing what he wanted to with Bond, and I like that you included both of them just because so many people crap on Spectre but love Skyfall,
Right.
and not to bring this up too hard, considering uh, one of both of our former coworker John Fulgham, but Halloween and Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie have that same thing going on, where if you thought anything of Zombie's first Halloween movie, Halloween 2 is basically the same thing.
Right.
But I know most people won't appreciate that inside humor, but white horses.
Well,
Um,
you beat me to it. I almost said it.
so yeah, and plus, I'm sure plenty of people. If anybody's seen the Rob Zombie Halloween movies, you probably have your own opinion about them in general. And John Carpenter definitely has some of those same opinions. But yeah, um, that could be an interesting future episode, actually, whether it's the entire Halloween series or not. I recently watched the entire Halloween series for my regular October horror-thon, and I don't know if I ever want to see Halloween Resurrection ever again, but I might would if we did a episode on it. So let's actually move forward to the specific three movies that we're about to watch. We're starting at the very, very beginning, Doctor No from Rush with Love, and then Goldfinger. And what I love about these three movies as a starting point is that, kind of like what you already accentuated, is the fact that this is really building to iconic Bond and what we think of when we say the words James Bond or 007. Goldfinger really is kind of the quintessential Bond movie. Because I think if I was ever going to say, you want to know what James Bond is and what that means, watch Goldfinger. Like, that is the James Bond movie in classic sensibility. But part of what I love about Doctor No, and even from Russia with Love, is the fact that when it first started, it's not like they knew that the series was going to go on for nearly 60 years now.
Right.
And Doctor No is basically just another 60s spy thriller.
Right. Right.
Not in a bad sense.
No. No.
It's a really good one, but it has that 60s vibe. And part of what I love about the James Bond series is that, just like, again, kind of like what you hinted at about Goldfinger, is that in so many good ways, it is the formula. It is the formula of Bond that has stuck around for nearly 6 decades. So that's tied to the 1960s and the 1960s style. Bond has adapted for all of that time and changed and moved forward with the times. But I love the fact that even saying that we still have these tropes that are very much tied to the 1960s, and it doesn't feel dated when we watch. At least I don't think it does. When we watch a Daniel Craig Bond movie, it feels like a modern day movie, but still very much married to those 60s tropes, including the opening credit sequences. The full on animated opening credit sequences. That's 1960s. We think of it today as, oh yeah, that's what's going to happen in a Bond movie. But at the time, that's what would happen in a movie.
Right,
That
right.
was just the way that most movies went, and we still hold on to them today for Bond and nothing else really. Nothing else that wouldn't feel like you were doing a callback.
Think of Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, uh, which
Yeah,
not coincidentally stars Daniel Craig, has a
yeah.
very Bond, reminiscent of Bond opening sequence, but is also crazy, insane, and very Fincher. Uh, but like you said, people go, "Oh, that's that's Bond esque." But as you said back then, if a film had like an opening title sequence, that was just the name of the game back then. Think of the Dollars trilogy, which also came out in the 60s. They had opening title sequences. Nothing as elaborate as Bond, but Hitchcock movies. That was just that was a very big thing in the 60s, and something that's missed by me. I think more movies should do opening titles, but
Pink Panther.
oh yeah, definitely Pink Panther. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Pink Panther is a huge one.
it's something I wish was back, but thankfully it is still intact in Bond, and it's not something that they shed away. Like you said, they're still married to the traditions, and that's, and like you said, it doesn't feel dated. It just feels like Bond, and that says a lot.
It says a lot to the quality of the producing and the filmmakers that have come on since, but it's also just become a staple in general, just the James Bond formula. And watching these first three movies, that's kind of what we're going to see beginning. We're going to see the early stages when Bond became Bond as the formula. And it continues to change from those after these films, moving forward to today. But at the same time, that is the formula. Goldfinger basically is James Bond, the formula, in a good way, but also in a way that potentially could be frustrating. In a certain sense, it could be if filmmakers don't utilize it correctly. But I like kind of imagining when we watch Doctor No, it'll be interesting in a way. Like imagine if Doctor No was it, and there was no long running James Bond series, and it's just this 1962 spy thriller. Uh, it's just kind of really peculiar in certain ways, and yet at the same time, it's obviously still James Bond. It's still very much things that we recognize as Bond are still in Doctor No. Villainous layer and evil plan, and we have the Bond girl, and we do have opening credits, but they're not the same as the opening credits will be. And I know we have plenty to say about that.
Oh, Three Blind Mice is the best Bond opening theme song ever.
But that's exactly the thing. They weren't thinking about it obviously in terms of here's our theme. They were just doing their opening
Right.
credits. I was randomly thinking about modern day movies that have opening credit sequences at all, and or that feel like callbacks or don't. And the first thing that popped in my head was Catch Me If You Can, which is obviously a decent while ago now, but that was meant to be a throwback. It meant to feel like in something from a different era. You don't get many that just feel like they're a piece of the movie unless you're David Fincher. but even David Fincher is tied to that style. You know, he's definitely trying to emulate something that he grew up with, but in his own way, which is really cool. And he wanted to turn Girl with the Dragon Tattoo into an adult series. You know, he was hoping to have that continue, and it obviously didn't in a way that he had hoped for. But its style was fantastic.
And
Yeah,
from
we barely
Russell
talked
Love.
about From Russia with Love, but not that we have to. Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
You're about
I
to.
was yeah, I was just about to. We were on the same page. One of the things that sticks out for me about it is Red Grant is probably the greatest Bond henchman in the entire series, which is
Yes, he is.
saying quite a bit because you have in the very next film you have maybe the most iconic or one of the most iconic henchmen with Odd Job. You have Jaws. You have you know more recently with Spectre, played by David Batista, Mr. Hinks, um, who was actually a great henchman. But a lot of and his character was very much inspired by Red Grant. Robert Shaw, who more famous now for Jaws as a Quint, but what a role! And this I can't wait to watch him again in it because his character is just so fascinating, and the whole build up, the opening sequence with which we'll talk about more after we watch it, but the opening sequence with him seemingly killing Bond, that was that was a they were already kind of, and like you said, they didn't really know they had an ongoing, they were making a sequel, but they didn't know how long it would go, but they were already kind of playing with the idea of an opening sequence and how to turn it on its head right there in the second movie. And there are lots of interesting ideas in From Rush with Love. It's got its own dedicated theme song. Gone are the three blind mice, and all the weirdness of the Doctor No opening. But it has a more, I guess, ingraining story. And if the ending didn't drag on, I was just going to say, if the ending didn't drag on, and I may change my mind when we watch it again. Uh, but if the ending didn't drag on as much as I think it does, it would be I would like it more than Goldfinger. But I think it kind of goes a little too long. It falls just a little flat, but it's still great. Like I said, it's up there. By the end of this, it might be in my top 7. But we'll see when we watch it again. But I definitely, I'm a huge fan of From Russia with Love. We haven't talked about it enough. Giving love to From Russia with Love now, but it is a great Bond movie.
I will say that before we've even rewatched it, that it feels. I think one of the reasons that I love it so much is that again, before the formula has really cemented, it's starting to become more like Bond as we know it. But it really feels so much like a Hitchcock movie. It has that harder edge to it in certain places, and the train fight is one of those scenes that uh, feels like something Hitchcock would have dreamt up because he always liked to focus on the reality of violence and the brutality of it. That it's not as easy to win as you might imagine, and I really like that sort of edge that it has. So I don't know about you, but I am definitely pumped even just talking about it, watching not just the whole series, but in particular these 3 movies for now. Doctor No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger. That's quite a trifecta to get us started.
Oh, for sure. I can't wait. And I'm going to suggest that we do a rating system out of 007. We'll give it a double O
Yeah.
digit between 1 and 7, and well, we'll do 000 for the absolute worst. I already know a candidate. Just to be comical, just to, give it a little fun. So be ready for that.
Well, I know my 000 already. That's for sure.
Oh, I do too. I don't think it's going to change. In fact, I know it's not, but I know
It's
we're
not.
talking about the same movie too.
We are.
Yeah.
Invisible car, laser from space. Yeah, we're talking about the same movie. Yeah, I guess I'll see you on the other side, my friend.
All right.
My name is Bond, James Bond. My instructions were implicit. I was to leave for Jamaica in 2 hours. License to kill.
Now you maybe miss it.
You don't miss a thing.
I decided to accept your invitation,
I have to leave immediately.
just as things were getting interesting again.
James Bond.
All right, Drew. So here we are on the other side of having watched Doctor No from Russia with Love and Goldfinger, all fresh rewatches. I'll point out the obvious, not that it has to be said, but um, we had to watch them on our own. I look forward to a time when we can actually watch things together theoretically, but we have a pandemic going on, and we also have hundreds of miles between us. So you kind of put those two things together, and we can't really easily watch anything together. Yeah,
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
on top of anything else.
All
Yeah,
right.
but still fresh rewatches of these three movies. So let's start with numero uno, Doctor No. I think like it wasn't it was the first film obviously made of Bond, but they did actually make a previous Bond adaptation on TV show Climax, which I've never seen, but would be fun to watch at some point. But I think it's really interesting how, obviously they wanted to make a series of Bond and keep that going, but when they made Doctor No, it's not like the world knew what Bond was going to become, and it's a
Right.
small budget movie, relatively speaking, at least. And they tried to adapt something, one of the Ian Fleming novels that wasn't as complex as some of the others. It's like one location really,
Yeah.
and it could keep it pretty simple. And I think that works in favor of the movie in a lot of ways, having it basically just be Jamaica. But yeah, what do you think about Doctor No as a movie?
Well, I really enjoyed the first kind of like the first hour is really good to me as far as like this is a good introduction of Bond. A classic introduction, the him playing in the casino, smoking, flirting with Sylvia Trench, and what I loved about that was that the classic Bond, James Bond, is, and people forget, and I forgot because it's been a long time since I've seen this movie, is actually out of. It's not just him saying that. That's a cool way I introduce myself. It's actually conversational because when she introduces herself, she says Trench, Sylvia Trench. I think that's her name. But anyway, she says that, and then Bond, you know, in response, Bond, James Bond, and it just stuck. It became a staple. I don't think it was intended to be one, but it became one.
A lot of staples didn't. Yeah,
Yeah. um, just because of Connery's delivery and just the essence of cool. But even going before that, I mentioned when we were talking about, and I'll talk about it more when we get to From Russia with Love, but I was talking about, well, they were already playing with the cold open, the Bond opening sequence before it became a thing. It's even more profound because I've forgotten Doctor No, there is no cold open. So the very first one in From Russia with Love plays with the
Yeah.
the whole idea, and it's not even a thing yet. But I thought that was interesting too because it starts with the gun barrel, and of course they had again it wasn't a thing yet, so they weren't doing it the classic traditional way yet because it wasn't a tradition yet. But when he comes out, the music doesn't cue until he's already fired and the blood starts coming down, so it's kind of awkward. But it's also very cool that they were playing with this idea so early. And of course, the we were talking about the '60s films that had these opening sequences with kind of a lot of lights and a lot of silhouettes, and the music choices here. Well, it sets up that it's in Jamaica. That's true. It's kind of all over the place, but it also plays the Bond theme at the beginning. So it's interesting, but I love kind of the little setup with Strangways getting murdered by these three assassins. Um,
Oh, not just any three assassins, Drew.
the, the three blind mice. Here
Here
we
we go.
go. Best Bond song ever. Not really, but it's that cracked me up so much with because I think the first time I watched this since I was a kid was with you several years ago now. And remember hearing that as the Bond song, it really cracks me up. But like to give this movie credit, I really like you can tell it's a small budget. They need Bond. Of course, was already a series of books, but they didn't know that this was going to be a phenomenon. So certain things are played down. It's probably the most low key Bond movie, maybe. And it's in
Oh yeah.
it,
Yeah, it's very
it's
likely.
part of it is situational. They didn't have a huge budget. They made it. Part of it's intentional. They were going for more of a low vibe spy film, but it also has a lot of the big things that we come to love later, as we talked about before. But it's slowly introduced here. But like I said, just that introduction and kind of like not even just the scene, but the whole first several minutes of Bond. You have him talking to Moneypenny, the flirtation in the office, which again a staple. His interactions with M in the office, again crucial to Bond films from then on. And it kind of reminds you that Bond, a lot of people go to see the movies for the action and the gadgets and all that. But at its very core, Bond, as a spy, he's an investigator. He's going, that's what spies do. Spies don't jump out of airplanes all the time with like British flag parachutes and stuff. Um, God, I love Roger Moore. I can't wait to get to his movie. But anyway, uh, that's not uh, what spies do in these, early Bond films. Really play up the investigation aspect, and he's there to investigate what happened to a British operative, Strangways, who was down there investigating the island in Crab Key, Jamaica, and a character named Doctor No. Oh, well, the title character, who's also the villain of this movie, and seeing what he's up to down there. And I don't know. I just love that aspect of it. There's, you know, before I throw it back to you, there's more intrigue to it. You have the CIA is also down there, and an introduction here of a character, Felix Leiter, who will go on to be in multiple Bond films, but played by different actors. But I think until recently, I think probably not played better or more iconic than anybody than Jack Lord in this one, who was famous for Hawaii Five O at the time. But it's just kind of there's not a lot of depth to the character here, but he's just a cool guy, has a cool look, the sunglasses, um, him kind of sizing up Bond at the beginning before they, become friends. With Quarrel and all that kind of stuff. I enjoy that, and then of course my favorite thing that I noticed on this viewing was the buildup of the Walther PPK, which is the signature gun that Bond uses pretty much from then till now. And it's built up. He didn't want to use it, and he preferred a Beretta, and there's actually a lot more dialogue about it than I thought there was. But they actually play it plays into the plot of the film, and with someone trying to assassinate Bond, he has this smooth, sophisticated weapon that he's able to get the upper hand. And the line that was a Smith and Wesson, and you've had your six, is one of my favorite lines from not just a Bond movie. It's just an awesome line in general. Um, but like, there's just a smoothness to Bond. Like everything about him is smooth. To the weapon that he now carries, which implies that he was maybe a little rougher around the edges before this one. But I don't know. I really enjoy the feel of it, especially like that first hour. It's just kind of a fun, low vibe spy film, and like we mentioned last time, think you specifically mentioned, try to think of it as not a Bond film, but just as a '60s spy movie. And what if there were no sequels or anything? I still think it would be cool. I don't think it would have the legacy that it has now, but it would still be a thing, a movie I'd have fun going back and watching.
It's just interesting to me to theorize, like, what if it was a standalone? Because it's obviously not impossible at all,
Right.
especially considering the fact that Doctor No didn't really make a lot of money on its first go around. It did make money. It just didn't make a lot of money. It made most of its money in double billings that came up with From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. It made more of its money down the road with the more successful movies. But at the same time, it obviously establishes a lot of what the franchise is really early on. And the best things about Doctor No, in my opinion, are those characteristics that carried forward, the things that are instantly iconic. Like you mentioned, the music, the Bond theme, at least the Bond theme, uh, from Monty Norman, is fantastic. Like you see that look through the gun barrel, and it's like, holy cow, this
Yeah.
feels like something. If you imagine it not being a thing that's lasted for nearly 6 decades, that really feels like a iconic thing. And when Bond is introduced, like it feels like an iconic thing. Those types of things keep
Right.
popping up. Uh, and speaking of Bond being smooth, Sean Connery is automatically Bond, and he's automatically found a character. That's something that is just fantastic about Doctor No. It's not like I mean, maybe he felt like he had to find a character, but when you watch Doctor No, it's not apparent that he is James Bond from the jump, and that's immediately apparent. And you have the stuff at the office that feels like, oh, these characters have known each other for a while. and this is how they interact. We're just jumping into their world. That's a really cool thing in and of itself. I like the tongue-in-cheek aspect of the movie, which they talked about being partially a way to get past censors because you have a movie filled with sex and violence, in 1962. It's not like they could get by with a whole lot, but that's a fun aspect of the movie. You play it in a cheeky way, and it's kind of got this fantasy feel to it. Uh, that's all really good stuff. Doctor No is an iconic villain, even though he's only in the movie for a really brief amount of time, relatively speaking to the whole movie. Um, I love those aspects of the movie, but I feel like it's maybe time to step into a little bit of criticism too, which I do like that Doctor No as a character is iconic even in a short time, but I really think that the structure of the movie doesn't really work. And part of it was just by the nature of the beast, so to speak. Like they didn't have a big budget. They were doing what they could with what they had. But I wish that structurally you got to see more of the villain and more of the finale. The finale gets really rushed. And it's like, whoa, wait, what's happening here? And then it's over. And
Right.
that's kind of a fault of the movie, or a weaker aspect of the
Yeah.
movie at least. And when they're on the island and they're in hiding and stuff, it, it's it's has some fun stuff to it, but it also has things that kind of make me go, I'm not so sure about that. It feels a little
Yeah.
weird, especially when they're talking about the dragon, and then you actually see the dragon, and it's like, I did they really think that was a creature? Because there's nothing about that that suggests a creature. Like, have they never seen a vehicle before, ever?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how that makes any sense, but eh, things like that kind of don't hold up.
The only way it makes sense, because I was thinking the exact same thing, uh, is that maybe they only saw it from an extreme distance. But even then, I still don't buy it because you could hear that it's clearly a tank. And Quarrel obviously is around motorboats all the time. So
Yeah,
it
he's not oblivious to technology.
right. It's it's a silly aspect of it for sure. I one thing I love about, because I completely agree with you. I think the ending, or well, not the ending, but like the climax, the last act of the movie, is where it kind of falls apart. But there are things I love at the same time. Like we've had a lot of build up to Doctor No, um, before we even meet him. The character Dent goes to the island to talk to him, and we have a cool, that's something that we're going to see a lot of in in this series, of people talking to a voice in a room before you see who the voice is. So the mystery of Doctor No's played up, and then the dinner scene. Really, I love from when they got captured on. I really enjoyed that until like the big finale, because I really enjoyed the tension of the dinner stuff that really gets established as a staple. Again, like you said, it keeps going on because we see these types of things in the rest of the Bond movies too. Bond is usually very cordial with his villains, and they're usually cordial with him. I enjoy that because a lot of movies, especially now that we live in the age of Marvel, uh, a lot of villains, it's just angry monologue at hero explaining the plot, and then it's over in a fight that lasted 13 seconds. Dr. No, and it also hints at other things. It hints at Spectre. It just talks about it. things that are going to continue on in the franchise. There's a lot of great build up, a lot of mystery around it, but at the end of the day, the finale is lackluster. Like you said, it's rushed. They couldn't do much, so it's kind of this lazy fight between people in hazmat suits. And as a movie goes, as a Bond movie goes, I mean that's pretty lame. But I understand the constraints. But I'm like you. I wish they could have focused more on making something that could work better with what they had. But we got what we got, and ultimately, I think just because there's so much strong stuff in my scale, I'm going to give Doctor No a 006 out of 7. It's the original Bond film, and like you said, like Connery could have like taken a couple of movies to get into the character, but like in the first 5 minutes, he is Bond. That is why I think so many people still to this day say that he's their favorite Bond or he's who they think of first because he is Bond. He is so in that realm when he is on screen that I can't argue with people that say that he's their favorite or that he's the first person that comes to mind because he is so iconic. And there's just so many great things that get established in this. But the ending falls flat, but it's just a solid Bond movie. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 006 out of 007, our first rating here.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I will criticize one more little thing, and that's the Three Blind Mice. Besides the theme song that we absolutely love, or the use of the song that we absolutely love, uh, what in the world? Why are they blind? Like, I don't understand it. Like, it's so silly. It is so incredibly silly. Like, obviously, the idea is, oh, you wouldn't look at them because they're blind. But if they were just three dudes walking down the street, they would be less obvious than three blind
Right.
guys that happen to be walking together in a group. That doesn't make any sense at all. Like, you're going to be more of a sore thumb if you're three dudes walking together blind. You know what I mean? Like, that does not make any sense.
I completely agree with that.
Like, it's such a tiny thing, but it really does bother me. And it fits into like the cheeky nature of what they were trying to do, but it's just too silly. And so much of the rest of the movie isn't silly in that same way. And that's where we start. That's like the first thing you see. It's kind of weak sauce. But anyway, as a total, I would give the movie a 005.
Okay.
Um, I do really like it. I just feel like it loses some steps in total, just for the rushness of the ending and uh, other aspects of it that just fall a little bit flat. But it certainly has some big strengths in it, like we mentioned. And I also like our Felix Slider as well, our Hawaii
Right.
5-0 Felix Slider. Um, yeah, that's cool, and I I think it's worth mentioning Honey Rider as well as a good character, iconic, obviously, but yeah,
The performance is good too. She's a good Bond girl. She's resourceful. She's not a complete damsel in distress. I think a lot of critics of Bond have this idea that the women in the films are just sex objects and they are just there for Bond to save. And I'm not going to say that that's never the case, um, because I mean, to a degree, it is. I don't think it's intentional, but I can see how people can see that. But with Honey Wilder starting off right out the gate, You have a Bond girl who's resourceful, who's smart, who is tough, and can get out of situations and help Bond. So I think that, you start off one of the biggest staples of Bond, the Bond girl, in a pretty strong place, and I'm almost very upset with myself for not even mentioning her until now. But yes, she's a big part of Doctor No, and of course she's probably the most iconic Bond girl, one of the most iconic. The shot of her walking out of the water is like it's one of the top 3 or 4 iconic images from Bond. So much so that it's been emulated terribly once in the
Right.
franchise,
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that one.
and
Yeah.
awesomely in a gender reversal in another movie in the franchise. So
I don't know. I agree with you. I do think it's worth pointing out. Like, obviously, the movies are 1960s here, and there's this sexed up aspect of them, in a light fantasy kind of way. I don't think it's. I mean, like you said, that there obviously can be some damsel in distress aspects in some Bond movies in some places, but when you look at here, it's lighthearted and it's fantasy, but it's not.
right,
I don't know. It's not like Bond is just using them as sex objects. At least I don't get that vibe personally. I mean, everybody falls for each other really fast, and they do their thing. It's flirtatious and maybe a little easy, but it is for everybody because that's just the vibe, you know. Um, but yeah, I think it's time that we probably could move on to our second movie, From Russia with Love.
Only the second James Bond thriller could be more exciting than the first.
Krylenko. So he's back.
I yeah, I know we talked about in the intro, as far as like our top Bond movies. From Russia with Love has been at times my favorite Bond movie, so I think it goes without saying to a certain extent that yeah, I think it's freaking fantastic. They obviously got a lot more funding because Doctor No did well enough and proved itself well enough as a movie that they could then take off. But boy, did they ever take off. Like, it's immediately apparent, like, we're off to the races. And it's the same director, too, Terrence Young. So, a lot of the characteristics that he had in Dr. No, he got to amplify to a big degree in From Russia with Love. I mean, from opening credits on through, like, it has all of these, terrific touches that, I don't know, is puts it in this larger universe. But uh, I don't know. I also like that it doesn't go complete. I mean, obviously it is fantasy, but it doesn't have that. It has a harder thriller edge than some Bond movies might. Like, we're not completely in the realm of formula yet, even though it has a lot of aspects that carry through. It still feels like a North by Northwest, you know, iteration of Bond. It I find really kind of fascinating. I don't know. I just thoroughly enjoy From Russia with Love anytime I watch it. How about you, Drew?
I I completely agree that it's a fantastic movie. it we were talking last before we watched them about how I always enjoyed the opening sequence, the cold open, the traditional Bond opening pre-title sequence, and that Rush. I said that From Russia with Love very early on was playing with the tropes of it. I didn't realize because it'd been so long since I had seen Doctor No that Doctor No didn't even have that sequence. It was just a
Right.
barrel sequence. We're off to the races, and From Russia with Love has the very first pre-title sequence, and it's that, and it's someone that looks like Bond getting murdered in an awesome kind of flip the script training sequence, setting up the threat, setting up Spectre, setting up you know Red, Ford, and
And a Mission Impossible mask.
yeah, yes. And it's all in it. I love that if we did a list, which we might, of like top 007 intros, or the cold opens, this would be in my top three or two, maybe even my favorite, because it's fantastic. It's and like you said, it has an edge, a thriller edge to it, and I love that about From Russia with Love, that there is this kind of has more of a biting edge to it than a lot of the other ones, especially at the time.
Well, it's worth mentioning too, like thinking about that opening credit sequence, but even well beyond that, mentioning Red, Mr. Robert Shaw, Mr. Quint, uh, or as I called him at one time, Mike Pence in this movie. Um, just because I can't.
he,
Once I saw it, I could not see it. But
he really does. I mean, yeah, it's uncanny. Yeah,
but no, like what a great character, really. Like at first he's just this hardened assassin, right? In like the best possible fantastic way, like this unstoppable force that has trained hardcore to like take down Bond. And then when you actually hear him talking and you're like, "Oh man, he's actually like a smooth talking agent as well." Like he's intelligent and actually considering his options. He's not just a blunt instrument. Like everything about this character, like as you see him and as he grows throughout the movie, I just think is utterly fantastic. Right down to the fight on the train. That's probably one of my favorite fights in a Bond movie as well.
it's fantastic. He is a great character, like you said, for those reasons. He's a physical threat to Bond, but he's also an intellectual threat. He's very smart. He's basically the opposite of Bond, the spiritual opposite, I guess. To have that very early on in this series is great. I don't think he gets mentioned enough when people talk about the best villains or best henchmen that Bond's ever faced. As far as henchmen go, he's number one. He's the best henchman from any Bond movie. I don't care what anybody says. But as a villain, just as a villain in general, he's great. Um, and one of my go ahead and well, I'll talk about some other things I like about Bond or about From Russia with Love. I like the song. It's the first like kind of traditional title song uh, for Bond, and it's fun to have that introduced in the series. We have Q introduced for the first time.
Yes,
Nothing's now such a big staple of Bond,
will be for some time. Yeah.
and yet he's not introduced till the second movie. And yes, it's his gadgets aren't necessarily mind blowing in this, but they're practical, and it's a fun little introduction to. I think he's great in this as well, but he's not quite. This is one thing that kind of changes over the course of the films, the kind of banter that they have, and the characters kind of being sharp. It's not as much here. He's just kind of introduced, but when it becomes more of a thing later on, it's one of another beloved staple is their relationship. Also, the story itself, we have Bond. I mean, basically, Russia and Britain are having to team up on this mission, and we have another Bond girl who is smart, uh, dangerous, of course, sexy, but again, I don't. And even though there are sex scenes in this movie, again, I don't think that it's just the sex appeal that makes her memorable or makes her or is the reason that she's in the story. She plays an integral part. She also is one of the better Bond girls, especially from this period. She's one of the better ones. I've probably better than Honey Rider. Honey Rider is just iconic, and she's the first, and she did great. But here we have kind of a more developed character, and
And an actress who didn't even speak English.
right. But she did good. She did very well.
She did.
And then Rosa Klebb, who is a great villain. Um, and again, is she a villain or is she a henchman? It's
That could be questionable. Yeah.
and another great aspect of the series is these villains. She was notably um, spoofed in Austin Powers, uh, but hilariously spoofed. And that's that just goes to show that she's a beloved character as well. That it goes all the way to Austin Powers, which is at the time 30 years beyond, a little more than 30 years beyond from Russia with Love, and someone clearly inspired by that character in it. But my biggest problem with From Russia with Love is that once the train sequence is over, it starts to drag a little bit. Um, Not necessarily because there's no action, because there is action, but I feel like some of the tension's gone with because Red is like a perfect, pitch perfect opponent for Bond, and he's this danger, and when he's gone, um, some of that tension leaves with him, and I feel like that the ending, which is a lot more explosive and fun than the ending of Doctor No, it's still kind of missing a little bit. Although it kind of gets amped up a little bit by Rosa Klebb's appearance at the end, which also got spoofed in Austin Powers so many times. The villain showing up after the ending, and of course it becomes a staple of Bond. Um, but that's my biggest criticism about this one. But I'm not going to cheat. I'm going to go ahead and give this a 007 out of 007. I think this would be in my top 7 now. If we're, when we do it at the end, it edges some of the other ones I had on my list by a considerable margin. It's a great movie. It's a great Bond movie. It establishes a lot, but it's also just a great story. And yeah, it's one of the best Bond movies. I think even with my criticism of it, I'd put it I'd put it in that top 007.
Yeah, and obviously that's perfectly valid when I say that I don't even agree that that's a problem for me at the end. Like it, I, I I love the way this movie ebbs and flows, and it's fair to have the perspective that it doesn't have that ideal climax in the biggest sense of the term, but I really like the way this movie feels like the henchmen are, kind of fighting for their lives. It has that kind of vibe to it, and you have the overarching villain that isn't directly, given a part in the climax of Blofeld, and that's another iconic image, obviously,
Right.
is Blofeld petting his white cat, another obvious thing that's spoofed in Austin Powers and that's set up here. Uh, and
Yes.
uh, I just that's one thing about From Russia with Love that I really dig is these characters that are given the need to fight for their lives as henchmen, whether you argue about them being the major villains or not. But I think that they are undoubtedly terrific characters. I think it's also worth mentioning Bond's comrade in here, who passed away shortly after this movie, Pedro Armendariz, or however precisely you pronounce his name, but he's definitely a terrific presence in the movie as well. And
Yes.
kind of a, I don't know, Felix Leiter obviously played a good part in Doctor No, but Pedro almost plays a bigger part in From Russia with Love. I just feel like you have these aspects of the story that are more developed than you had in Doctor No in general. But I'll cut to the chase though too, and say what must be obvious that I'd give the movie a perfect 007 rating
Well, that's a consensus.
on our scale.
From Russia with Love is the first uh, certified 007 out of 007, and it will not be the last, uh, but it is the first.
It won't be the last. It won't even be the last in this
No,
episode.
no, uh, not at all. And what a wonderful transition and segue here. Goldfinger.
Not that I'm going to spoil my rating 007, but yeah, go ahead, Goldfinger.
Stop! Look! He's gunning for trouble. 007. It spells Bond.
Shocking.
He's the idol of every woman.
Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
The envy of every man. The nemesis of the treacherous Mr. Goldfinger.
Goldfinger is, in a lot of ways, it's the quintessential Bond movie. We've already said that, but it has a lot of the fun traits that a lot of the movies adapt, but also at the same time, it still has kind of the same spirit of these earlier two movies. It's kind of an Old Testament, New Testament in one. It's a thriller. It has some tension. Is it a little more fun, kind of a romp than the other two?
Yeah,
Absolutely, but it's pitch perfect. The opening sequence is Bond setting off explosives somewhere. he
that's a shocking start. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got the he's got the like little pigeon over his cowl of his swimsuit. It's hilarious, but awesome. Like, it's a good disguise. It's not something completely, unbelievable. He goes in.
Well, if you saw it from a distance,
Right,
it's not like that wouldn't work.
right, right. And he goes in, and he has the last rendezvous with this girl, and that if it was its own Bond movie, I guess she would have been the Bond girl of that particular story. They're in they're in a room. It's about to leave, and this is very Hitchcockian. In the reflection of her eye, he sees an attacker.
Yeah.
And very not Hitchcockian, he gets thrown into a tub with a plugged in electrical device, and he, of course, fries and a one liner. Shocking. Positively shocking. And we go into what is arguably the greatest Bond song. Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger is it's what so many of these movies, so many of these songs try to emulate. It's a perfect song, I think. It's great. The theme, the music itself is awesome, and it's used wonderfully in the score. I could go on about this one forever. It's one of my favorite Bond movies. It's one of my favorite movies in general, but it's just a great story. You have, and I'm not going to talk about every plot line, but you have a lot of intrigue, the mystery with Bond kind of exploring and looking into Auric Goldfinger, who is quite possibly, arguably, I mean, maybe they're better, but he's one of the best Bond villains. And he's such a great character. He has so many great lines. And again, the kind of banner that he has with Bond throughout the film is key to my enjoyment of it. They have so many run-ins, and some of them are sinister, and some of them are not. Of course, there's the classic, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." But there's also the scenes where he's at his manor in Kentucky, where they're having to kind of tolerate each other's company, and I enjoy those scenes just as much. Of course, the Bond girl. Well, here we've got a few. We've got a few Bond girls. I mean, obviously, there's one. The main one is Pussy Galore. Honor Blackman just recently passed away. That played Pussy, but she, again, resourceful, intelligent, not a damsel in distress. Actually, one of the villains until the last act of the movie. But starting out, we have, Jill Masterson, this beautiful girl that Bond meets in Miami that's with Goldfinger. And she's murdered, which is kind of what leads to it's part of the plot. She's painted in gold, which is an iconic image. You have Tilly Masterson, who is her sister seeking revenge, and she's a really lousy shot with a rifle.
To say the least, yeah. But
But again, and you think, okay, she's going to be the Bond girl, and ultimately she's not because she meets an untimely death as well. And I like that aspect of it because the plot, if you were watching this and you had not seen Goldfinger a million times like us, that would be, that would be kind of shocking, unexpected. You have two characters that really could have fit the form of what you would think would be the Bond girl of the movie, dying relatively early in it. And, there's just so many good points to this movie. You have Odd Job, one of the most iconic henchmen in the series, and he's not Redford. He's definitely more brawn than brains. Their fight, again, shocking, positively shocking. It's a Bond's fight at the end with him is fantastic. It's one of my favorite. I kind of get goosebumps when I see it because it's just so well played. It's a great moment. I think with the style of the 60s, the climaxes of these movies aren't necessarily what audiences today would, blow their minds. But I think for what they had, the tension in this climax in the big, battle at Fort Knox, it's wonderful. It's so well played. There are different dynamics to everything. You have Odd Job inside. You have all this poisonous gas that's supposedly been leaked, and all of Bond's help, including Leiter, already played by another actor early on, but and not as iconic. But whatever. But whatever. But it's, you have all this going on, and Bond is seemingly down to like his last wits trying to win. This is not Bond like easily winning by any means. Even though it's more of a romp, it's still a struggle, and it's still a tense adventure. And I love that about it. And I do think that it is the best of the Connery era. So definitely, I give it a 007 out of 007.
Thinking about the action, and like obviously it's not in a certain sense spectacular, like in terms of like so many different explosions or action beats and like intricate choreography and stuff. What you have is incredibly well built and structured and put together. And it reminds me of something that I forgot to say about From Russia with Love, which was like the scene with the helicopter, um, and how well built the
Yes.
action is there. And part of it is the pacing, and that's true in Goldfinger as well. Like the editing, the pacing of it is part of the intensity. Like when Oddjob in Goldfinger is running down those steps, uh, it's just so intense, and there's every reason for it
Yeah.
to be silly, and yet it's not silly at all. It completely has this fantastic action tension that I think works really well. Um, you already mentioned the Bond women that I think are all well played throughout and play a pivotal role, but also worth mentioning uh, Goldfinger himself is one of the best villains, and how structurally he's really well built throughout the story in a way that you don't have this exact same sense of in either of the previous two movies. That's part of
Right.
why Goldfinger works as a formula the way it does, is because you actually have this Bond villain that plays a pivotal role throughout and has a relationship with Bond. And it's not like that is strictly necessary, but it is a part of the formula, is the way that dynamic plays out. And another reason I think Goldfinger works so well, is that Bond is consistently chided for being Bond throughout the entire movie. Like right from the get go, they say, "Bond, why did you fail here at the beginning? It's because you had the hots for this chick, didn't you? And that's why you lost sight of the prize, and you weren't on top of Goldfinger the way you were. Is because you were in bed with this woman, with Jill Masterson, and turned obviously suffocated in gold paint." But yeah, he's chided for that, and then you actually see him kind of own up to it and be like, "Yeah, you're right. I kind of need to focus and be a spy here." And that's something that I don't think gets enough credit, is the way that Goldfinger really works on that level of taking the wind out of his sails and making him kind of earn his keep, so to speak, as a spy, and not just as some guy who walks into the room and is all suave and gets the job done. Like he's imprisoned and doesn't have it all figured out, and he ends up kind of being saved by pussy, so to speak. And that's a big part of the appeal of Goldfinger, is the way that structurally works and the way it dramatically works. And I say dramatically, it is still fantasy in more of a sense than either of the previous two movies. Obviously, I mentioned fantasy in both of all these movies so far as an important aspect. The cheekiness, the way that it's just a fun action adventure storyline, but it really plays up in Goldfinger with things like the gold laser, which is like the first time you've had a laser on screen in a movie, and it's a gold laser, and boy is that perfect. Like it's an iconic scene of him being on the table and Goldfinger, you know,
Yes.
potentially going to saw him in half with the laser beam. but it's like it fits Goldfinger as a character perfectly too. Like, of course, this guy would use gold as a laser, and I just love the heightened sensibility that you have with it. But it's definitely a perfect 007 on our scale. It is what it is for a good reason. I will say this though, and this isn't really even a criticism, it's just something I find really funny when he's asking for the cooperation of all these other people for his plan, all these other evil villains and their money, and the one guy that says, "No, I don't want a part of this. This sounds absurd," and everybody else gets killed in the
His
room with
name's
gas.
Solo.
Solo leaves, and they
Right.
allow him to leave up until they kill him and crush him. And there's absolutely zero reason um, that they needed to do that. They could have just killed him in the room with everybody else with gas. But they're like, "Oh no, you want to leave? Go
Right.
ahead and leave, and we'll just wait to kill you miles down the road." Um, eh, Zero reason they needed to do that. It's just an unnecessary waste of time. Um, but
Right.
I guess they're okay with the theatrics for themselves. Like it probably entertains Goldfinger and Oddjob to
Right.
let that play out. Or maybe Oddjob just really wanted to go for a drive. I don't know.
We would be remiss if we didn't talk about the Aston Martin DB5,
Oh
which
yeah.
is, again, this is the iconic Bond car. This is the iconic Q uh, gadget. This is kind of what establishes Q being a fan favorite. And that car, of course, and all the gadgets and the sequence with the factory and Bond using all the ejector seat and all the other little trinkets. And again, it's in a scene where he loses. um, it's not
Right.
a. It's funny that it's not this thing that saves the day and he uses it to win or anything like that. That he he eventually gets captured and wrecks of Goldfinger and ends up being a staple of having a car with all these gadgets, and it persists to this day. As of Spectre, the Bond franchise embraces this.
And I do have to mention too, not only is Goldfinger a great character, but the name Auric Goldfinger is freaking fantastic too, in the best fantastic
It
sense of the
is.
term. The name, the performance, the everything, it's pretty perfect and spot on for what you want out of a Bond villain. Well, that's a good part one, a good start to our 007 marathon. When next we meet, we'll be watching the next three James Bond official movies: Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service. That's quite an interesting run, if I do say so myself. I do think it's worth mentioning too that Goldfinger was a gargantuan success and is one of the highest grossing movies of all time, and so is Thunderball. That is the next movie we're gonna watch. This is Bond at its absolute peak in terms of public consciousness and in terms of box office success. And obviously, they're still successful to this day. But boy, this is really the time that James Bond was just huge, huge in terms of box office influence. And at the same time, when next we meet, we're going to get to the point that they start really tinkering at the idea of who they want to play Bond and what that means for the franchise going
Right.
forward, and almost threatens to derail everything. So that's really a lot to talk about when we get to these next three movies. What do you think about, just briefly, what we're getting into next?
Well, I'm not the biggest fan of Thunderball. Of course, I haven't watched it in a long time, so I'm interested to watch it again.
I haven't either.
I'm interested to see it again. You never know what you're gonna feel about something, 10, 15 years removed from the last time you saw it, and your taste evolve. or you see something that you didn't see in a previous viewing. So I'm always willing to give a movie a chance, even if it's something I hated initially. I don't think I hated Thunderball, but it wasn't one of my favorites.
But it is the most financially successful.
Which is crazy, but it
It
was
is.
riding on the hype of Goldfinger at the
Exactly.
time, and it was a phenomenon at the time, which is cool to think about in a lot of ways. I kind of wish I would have been around for that to see like the hype, you know, like the '60s hype for another Bond movie. You Only Live Twice is a fun one that I have fond memories of, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service is quite possibly one of the more divisive Bond movies because there are a lot of people that hate it and there are a lot of people that love it, and some people that very high renown consider it to be the best Bond movie, notably Christopher Nolan. It's his
Right.
favorite, and you can see that all over Inception that he was very inspired by Bond, especially specifically on Her Majesty's Secret Service because there's a huge snow sequence, which
Yes.
becomes kind of a staple of Bond in general because there are several movies after On Her Majesty's Secret Service that have kind of these snow. Because I mean, you can't have them all be in Jamaica, but and we'll talk about it a lot in the episode, but especially when we see it again, because again, I haven't seen it in a while. That's kind of the most notable thing about it to me is that it's so divisive. I have my feelings about it, and I don't really put it high or low on my Bond standings. But there are people that will straight up tell you that it is the best. It's the best Bond film, no questions asked, or one of the
Yep.
best. And then there are some people that tell you they absolutely hate it and the extreme reactions to it. So it's going to be interesting. This is going to be the most interesting batch of these that we'll watch at least for a few episodes because Doctor No, Doctor No was most people generally consider it solid, and From Russia with Love and Goldfinger are two of the best. But here we got a little more mixed bag, and I'm kind of interested to see what we both think about them.
Me too. Like, I really don't know where I'm gonna land for a fact because I mean, I'm very similar to you. I've never been a huge Thunderball fan. I remember You Only Live Twice fondly, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service is one that I enjoyed, but not nearly as much as some people have given it credit for, and certainly not the hate that some other people have given it either. These are more middle of the road Bond movies in my memory, so I'm a little curious where we're gonna fall once we've had a fresh rewatch behind us. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it just the same. I think it'll be fun to revisit them, and I'm looking forward to next time, Drew. So when next we meet here at Movie Marathon Mood, we'll be talking about Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, continuing our Bond marathon. Drew, thank you for being here and watching these movies with me.
And thank you, Jesse. I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
Me too. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.